Yeah, turn it up. Yeah, that's it. Word. Yeah. Yo. So break it down for the little ones, the daughters and the sons. You ready for revolution? You better bust it on, but know the word is a weapon. So I better recognize when bad man stepping. You better realize when rude boys stepping. Now they dance all nice, they dance all fresh, they dance all wet, and everybody starts sweat when AKX is addressing. His MC starts stressing when we step up in the session. MC start
take stock in the soul, spit properly. Take stock in the soul, spit properly. That extends the clip on my hip, says awfully. I'm diabolical, follicle triggers. Then I cock and squeeze, sending shots to ancient Greece. The pop Socrates, I bear arms like.
Yo. What it is, it's AKX Righteous Revolution, and this is the brand new Righteous Revolution podcast. I'm starting this podcast today, and I want to focus on some things that we don't always cover within the culture. You know what I mean? I want to cover hip-hop culture, reggae and dancehall culture, you know, the culture from the islands and the U.S. But I also want to, you know, get into history, politics, you know what I'm saying? And some of the things that affect us, you know, from the past even until today. So we're going to get right into it. I got it set up for today, so we do it a little interview format so that you guys can learn a little bit about me, a little bit about Righteous Revolution, our music, and what it's really all about. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to dive into that interview portion of the podcast right now. I got, you know, the lady who helped me set up everything you see right here, right now with this podcast. You know, she's going to do the interview. Let's get it going.
So you're from the islands, Trinidad and Tobago to be exact. What was life like for you as a child growing up?
Word, yes, from the islands. Trinidad and Tobago is a twin republic. It's two islands comprising one country. So my father is from Tobago and my mother's from Trinidad. So I'm a real Trin-Bagonian, as they say. And, you know, life growing up was tough. I mean, to be truthful, it was really difficult. We just didn't have a lot of the things that, you know, you would think that would just be there as a child. And, you know, I grew up in poverty, you know, in a lot of difficulties. And, you know, regardless of what the factors were that caused that, that's how I grew up. That's what I grew up in. And, you know, just simple things, you know, for example, like running water, you know what I mean, it just wasn't always there. You'd have to get up in the morning, for example, go down to like a standpipe, might be, you know, a mile, half a mile away, whatever. Not, you know, sometimes it's not far, it's right out the road. But you got to go onto a standpipe, grab a couple of buckets, fill it up, you know, bring that back home just to, you know, to freshen up and, you know, get a bath, whatever, before you even go to school. You know what I'm saying? So these are the type of difficulties I'm talking about. Not having running water, you know what I mean? A lot of times not being able to depend on electricity and stuff like that. You know, these are some of the situations overall, you know, growing up in a third world country.
Okay, well, I can't imagine there's many people in the U.S. who understand what it's like not to have running water.
Word.
How did that shape the music you would do later in life, your beliefs, and what you became interested in?
Yeah, I mean, you know, growing up in what, you know, in colonialism, to put it straightforwardly, it affects how you think even as a child. It affected what I wanted to become interested in. I wanted to know more about my history. I wanted to know more about the effects of slavery on what we were seeing before our very eyes as we were growing up in the Caribbean. I wanted to understand, you know, the elements of imperialism and colonialism, and my desire to know these things and know the history as opposed to the history they were teaching us in the classroom. Excuse me. To know that history, it really affected what I wanted to listen to as far as music was concerned, what I read, you know, what I studied, and then it in turn affected when I started getting into the studio and doing music, what I wanted to talk about, and it definitely affected what we know as Righteous Revolution music today.
Okay, you mentioned the effects of colonialism in the Caribbean. Can you elaborate more on that versus the history for Black people in America?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important question because I think it's something that people don't really look at in much detail. People see, black people throughout the diaspora and kind of see us as one entity. But when you're growing up in different cultures and in different geographical locations, it plays a huge part on your mindset and how you think about the same specific thing. So a lot of people growing up, under colonialism, they don't see the white supremacy and that type of thing directly. So, for example, me, I hadn't seen, I think there was, a white kid in my class when I was younger, but I hadn't seen a white person again until I was like, 10 years old. You know what I mean? So, except for television. So, that there's a difference when the elements or the European element that you believe is oppressing you, or that is bringing oppression on you, is an element you're growing up with. That's the case with most African Americans. They grew up seeing in segregated situations, seeing the racism, of white America directly pointed towards them. And that's going to create a different type of mindset than somebody who's growing up recognizing that there is, colonialism and recognizing that there's so many negative effects, like the economic effects of white supremacy in the Caribbean, definitely seen and felt. You know what I'm saying? The effects of the monetary policies and economic policies taken up by, superpower countries and how they affect countries like Trinidad, that's readily seen. But you are not seeing the direct racism that, African Americans, so to speak, are growing up with. So as a result of that, there is just a different mindset. There's just a different culture. We don't have 100 years in the Caribbean of Jim Crow laws. We don't have 100 years of segregation laws because there was nothing to be segregated from. The majority of the islands were black people or people of color. And in the case of Trinidad, you have people of African descent and mostly people of East Indian descent, both people of color on the islands. And both India, Pakistan, and Africa were negatively affected by racism, imperialism, and colonialism that then later affected these same people being in, there in the Caribbean. So that's the major difference, just not having that direct interaction. 100 years of Jim Crow laws, years of lynching, that didn't happen in the Caribbean. And so colonialism and imperialism here in the U.S. it was two different things. And it affects the mindset of the people differently. And we've got to recognize that within the culture when we're having these types of discussions.
That's some great information.
Word.
Now, you talked about growing up hard. Were there key elements besides poverty and not having money that made it hard?
Yeah, definitely. I grew up, I enjoyed my life as a child, because a child is generally, slanted towards enjoying childhood and enjoying your life. You're just happy as a kid. But there's definite things that come into play that take away from that. And, growing up in poverty obviously would take away from that. But my dad fell victim to the same epidemic that hit the black community in America, the drug epidemic, the crack epidemic, and the effects, when cocaine hit, Trinidad really hard during the 80s, that really affected my family, and it definitely ended up affecting my dad. And our proximity to Venezuela makes Trinidad like a kind of a hub for a lot of activities dealing with cocaine. And so the free flow of the drug into the island was an element that was there when I was growing up. And as a result, my father became addicted, and it affected our entire life. We grew up in a lot of fear. When you have a situation where there's already poverty, and then you add addiction to the situation where all your funds are being sapped out and everything in the house is being sold and you're in economic depravity continuously, I mean, that just causes you to grow up in a way that's so negative that your mindset is negative. But it really affected me in a different way. I looked at it as a situation where these are obstacles. These are things in life that I'm going to overcome. I'm going to overcome all these difficulties and I'm going to make something of myself. So that's how I saw it then. But yeah, my father's drug addiction, I grew up in, seeing a lot of domestic violence and stuff like that. It was really difficult.
Now, this question might be kind of personal and close to home, but can you give us some stories of some things that you saw in your life at that time?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in a close society where, your father is, heavily addicted to drugs and involved with a lot of negative characters, drug dealers, and so on. I saw a lot of negative. I saw, guys come into the house, knocking on the door. When you looked out, guys had guns and so on, demanding monies that my father had owed from my mother. And, I can recall countless situations where my mother would go to the bank or wherever she had to go and get money to appease those situations, because all, the lives of me, my brother, and my sister was threatened. My mother's life was threatened. And sometimes my father would be gone for days, weeks, months at a time. And so this was the effect of that. I saw massive amount of drug paraphernalia, massive amount of cocaine, massive amount, I saw crack cooking. I saw these things continuously. I saw these things live. You know what I mean? Besides the threats and the violence, I saw a lot of domestic violence, a lot of bad domestic violent situations. And, you just grew up in a situation, you're always in limbo. You never know if you're going to be in the house, out of the house, if your father's going to be there, if he's not going to be there, if your mother's going to end up in the hospital. You just never know. From day to day, night to night, it was always a volatile situation. So that's some of the crazy things that I saw, that I grew up in.
Those are some really heartbreaking things to grow up in. That would give you kind of a negative outlook, I think. How did you even manage to figure out how to get out of Trinidad?
Yeah, word. I mean, fast forward, actually go back a little bit. I played soccer, what we call football, but Americans call soccer, ever since I was a kid. So since the age of 6, 7 years old, I played competitively, club soccer. And then I started playing school for my school. And then when, the fruits of me not giving a damn in school and always breaking school, never paying attention in class, never doing my schoolwork, always giving trouble, and becoming a kind of a renegade, I ended up not passing any of my subjects when it was time for me to, do my final exams and so on. So I ended up, having to repeat and try to get in a situation where I can do that exam over. And unfortunately, I was able to get into one of the best schools on the island through my ability to play soccer. And then once I got that opportunity, I kind of zeroed in a little bit on my academics, got things done in that area, and I started shaping things up to where I can try to get some type of a scholarship to leave the island. Now, you got to understand, in my area where I live, there is nobody who had done this. There was no example of this being done for me to follow. And I wasn't of the caliber of players that usually got something like a soccer scholarship. They were usually, the real, the creme de la creme, the best, the top players, And I was a hard-working player. I thought I was a decent player, but I didn't necessarily think that I was of that particular, level or ilk. Nevertheless, I had confidence in what I can bring to the table. I toured with a team from Trinidad in 1993. We toured North and South Carolina playing ball against colleges up here so you can get a look. And through that process, I made some contacts. I started working on a resume and building, a little networking situation where I contacted schools and directly myself to try to see if I can work things to get myself a scholarship. And this had really never been done. Usually you have a contact. Usually you have somebody who is speaking on your behalf. I didn't have all that. And Weber International University, the school that I ended up going to, they started talking with me and working with me, and I got the necessary paperwork in line. But when I went to the embassy, I'm talking about going to an embassy on an island where you're lined up at 3 o'clock in the morning to try to get a visa, a student visa to leave the island. Okay. And when I did that, I couldn't even see the embassy from where I was in the line. At 3 a.m. in the morning, the embassy opens at 8. Okay. When I got up there, I still got denied. Okay. I continued working. And when you get denied, this is like a stamp in your passport that says, you're never going to get this. This is never going to happen for you. All right. And I turned around. I contacted the school. They contacted the congressman for the area. And this congressman, somebody who had never spoken to me, didn't know who I was, wrote a letter to the embassy in Trinidad asking them, as an international student, if I can get my visa. And the embassy responded by calling me when it was closed to the public and calling me in and giving me my student visa. And within days of that, I was out of Trinidad and Tobago, and I was in the USA, down south, in a taxi with a hillbilly, taking me to college. So, you can imagine the culture shock. But that's basically the story. That's how I managed to get out of Trinidad. Went to college at Weber International University, played 4 years of college soccer, and I graduated in 2000. Now I'm giving away my age. And I graduated in 2000 and then started working on Righteous Revolution music and the hip hop that, kind of has me in this position right now doing this podcast. So that's kind of a lot of the background of the story. You're going to hear more about my history. You're going to hear more about what I have done in the past and what kind of brought me to this point. But you got to check out Righteous Revolution. Okay, go to righteousrevolution.com. That's where we got everything going on. That's the website. And the podcast, everything is going to be there. We're going to take a quick break. Holler back at you in a second. AKX, Righteous Revolution. Yo, I'm back. I'm back with the reggae dancehall hit song of the week, and this one is from Chip Fu from Trinidad. Remember the Fushnickers? You know what I'm saying? Yo. Yeah, y'all thought Chip Fu was done, right? Nah, he's still doing music. Yeah. Video is dope too. Check it out. Yeah, so every week you're going to get the hip-hop hit of the week. It's only going to be something dope. And I'm going to give you the dancehall / reggae hit of the week. Did I say hip of the week? Anyway, besides that, you got to go to the comments, say what you feel about the podcast, anything that you want me to address as far as a lot of the stuff I brought up, the history of Trinidad, colonialism, imperialism, you know what I'm saying? Leave a comment and I will definitely get to it. You know what I mean? Give us a thumbs up, a like, and then subscribe to the Righteous Revolution YouTube channel. That's what you definitely got to do. All right? This is AKX, Righteous Revolution. Go to righteousrevolution.com. Yo, thank you for joining me on the first Righteous Revolution podcast. You know what I mean? I hope you join me for many more. I hope this is the first of many more. You know what I mean? And I went into a lot about my history and some details about my childhood just to show you that I'm a regular motherfucker. I'm a regular dude that, is doing this podcast out of the love of hip-hop, the love of reggae music, the love of black music on the whole, and black culture and history. And so that's why I'm doing this Righteous Revolution podcast, getting people to really focus on a vibe where we want to deal with each other in the right way, where that's actually important again. You know what I'm saying? So that's what it's all about. So that's why I went into a little bit about my childhood, showed you my history, showed you some of the things that I went through. So I'm somebody who went through the difficult things in life and the grind. You know what I mean? And I'm out on this other side. And that's the same thing that can happen. Anybody vibing with me, viewing this podcast, whatever. You know what I mean? And that's the purpose for bringing your life to the forefront, so that other people can kind of learn from it and benefit from what you've gone through.
Yeah, turn it up. Yeah, that's it. Word. Yeah. Yo. So break it down for the little ones, the daughters and the sons. You ready for revolution? You better bust it on, but know the word is a weapon. So I better recognize when bad man stepping. You better realize when rude boys stepping. Now they dance all nice, they dance all fresh, they dance all wet, and everybody starts sweat when AKX is addressing. His MC starts stressing when we step up in the session. MC start confessing.